Dracula by Bram Stoker, published in 1897, is one of the most iconic Gothic novels in literary history. Its creation, themes, and impact have deep connections with both historical contexts and Stoker's life. Here are some interesting facts and historical insights. 1. Inspiration from Vlad the Impaler. The character of Count Dracula is often believed to be loosely based on Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century prince of Wallachia, modern-day Romania. Vlad was notorious for his brutal methods of punishing enemies, particularly impaling them on stakes, earning him a fearsome reputation. While Stoker did not detail a strong historical link, he borrowed Vlad's name and reputation for cruelty. 2. Influence of Victorian fears. Dracula reflects many of the anxieties of late Victorian England. The novel taps into fears of foreign invasion, with Dracula symbolizing the other, an Eastern European threat to Western European civilization. This fear was prevalent in a time when Britain was both fascinated and threatened by foreign cultures and colonial expansion. Sexuality and repressed desire also play a major role in the novel. Victorian society was outwardly conservative, but Dracula explores sexual freedom through vampirism, which was seen as a metaphor for forbidden or suppressed urges, especially through the transformation of women like Lucy. 3. The rise of Gothic literature. Stoker's Dracula is part of the Gothic tradition, a genre that was flourishing in the 18th and 19th centuries, with works like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Edgar Allan Poe's stories of horror. This genre emphasized themes like mystery, death, supernatural elements, and decaying aristocracy, many of which are seen in Dracula. 4. Stoker's life and connections. Bram Stoker was an Irish author who worked for many years as a manager for the famous actor Henry Irving, who some believe may have inspired Dracula's aristocratic and charismatic personality. Stoker dedicated Dracula to Irving, though Irving reportedly didn't care much for the book. Stoker's social circles included literary greats like Oscar Wilde and Arthur Conan Doyle, both of whom were part of the vibrant intellectual scene in London at the time. 5. Innovative storytelling through epistolary format. Stoker used an epistolary format, telling the story through letters, diary entries, and newspaper articles. This method helped to build suspense, as readers pieced together different perspectives and events. The fragmented style adds to the sense of mystery and dread, as no single character knows the full story until the very end. 6. Eastern Europe and the rise of vampirism myths. The novel helped to solidify and popularize many elements of modern vampire lore, but Stoker was inspired by older European legends. Myths of vampires, blood-sucking creatures, were common in Eastern European folklore, particularly in the Carpathian and Balkan regions, where tales of revenants, beings that returned from the dead, and night-dwelling demons were widespread. The vampire's association with blood, immortality, and death was already prevalent in folklore, but Dracula blended these traditions with the new science of the 19th century, including blood transfusions, a method attempted to save Lucy in the novel. 7. Scientific discoveries and medical fascination. The late 19th century was a time of great medical and scientific advancements, and the novel reflects this. Dr. Seward's use of phonographs to record case notes, Van Helsing's modern medical methods, and the role of blood in life and death all tie into contemporary scientific interests. Blood transfusion, for instance, was a relatively new and experimental practice at the time. 8. Public reaction and cultural impact. Upon its release, Dracula did not achieve immediate fame, but it gained popularity over time. Its success grew with the rise of film adaptations in the early 20th century, most notably the 1931 movie starring Bela Lugosi and the earlier silent film Nosferatu, 1922, which was an unauthorized adaptation of Stoker's novel. These films solidified the vampire figure in popular culture. 9. Themes of colonialism and power. Some scholars interpret Dracula as a critique of colonialism. The Count, as a foreigner from the East, invades England to spread his influence, mirroring the fears of non-Western powers encroaching on Britain's dominance. Dracula is often seen as a metaphor for the decline of the British Empire, as his corrupting power spreads to England, undermining its moral and social order. 10. Women's roles and Victorian gender expectations. Female characters like Lucy and Mina reflect Victorian ideas of womanhood. Lucy's transformation from an innocent, virtuous woman to a predatory vampire taps into fears of female sexuality and autonomy. In contrast, Mina represents the ideal Victorian woman, intelligent, loyal, and maternal. The men in the novel strive to protect women, reinforcing the era's patriarchal ideals, though Mina's active role also challenges these conventions. 11. Bram Stoker's research into folklore. Stoker spent 7 years researching European folklore, history, and vampire legends before writing Dracula. He immersed himself in books about Transylvanian and Romanian culture, though he never actually visited the region. Instead, he used books like Emily Gerard's 1885 essay Transylvanian Superstitions, which introduced him to local vampire myths and traditions. 12. Psychological theories of the time. Stoker's Dracula was written during a period when Sigmund Freud's theories about the unconscious, dreams, and repressed desires were beginning to gain attention. Some critics argue that the novel taps into the fears of repressed sexuality, particularly through the seductive nature of vampirism and the way Dracula's victims experience a mix of terror and desire. This plays into the broader theme of the Victorian era's tension between public morality and private desires. 13. Victorian society's obsession with death and the afterlife. Victorian England was deeply fascinated with death, the afterlife, and spiritualism. Advances in medicine and increasing awareness of death, combined with religious uncertainty, led to a heightened interest in the supernatural. The Victorian cult of mourning, with its elaborate funerals and grieving practices, reflects this obsession. Vampirism, with its focus on the undead, speaks directly to Victorian anxieties about life after death and the potential to return from the grave. 14. Influence of Gothic architecture. The architectural descriptions in Dracula, particularly the depiction of Dracula's castle, draw on the style of Gothic architecture, which was seen as dark and mysterious by the Victorians. The crumbling towers, long hallways, and hidden passages reflect this architectural trend and add to the eerie atmosphere. This also symbolizes the decaying aristocracy, as Dracula is portrayed as a centuries-old nobleman who lives in a crumbling relic of a bygone era. 15. Impact of colonial Britain on the novel. Stoker's portrayal of Dracula as a foreign invader reflects Britain's colonial anxieties in the late 19th century. The British Empire was at its height, yet the novel reflects fears of reverse colonization, the idea that foreign influences could threaten and infect British society. Dracula's journey to England from the East mirrors concerns that foreign people and ideas were infiltrating the heart of the empire, a theme resonating with the xenophobia of the time. 16. The hypnotic powers of Dracula and mesmerism. Dracula's ability to hypnotize his victims and exert mental control over them was likely influenced by mesmerism, a popular pseudoscientific theory at the time. Mesmerism, developed by Franz Mesmer, involved the belief in animal magnetism and the ability to influence others' minds and bodies. This idea was widely discussed during the Victorian era, with many believing that hypnotism could control thoughts and actions, much like Dracula's supernatural powers over his victims. 17. Jack the Ripper influence. The novel was written just a few years after the Jack the Ripper murders in London, 1888. The brutal, shadowy nature of these crimes and the public fascination with a mysterious, seemingly unstoppable killer had a profound influence on the atmosphere of fear and dread in Victorian society. While there's no direct reference to Jack the Ripper in Dracula, the novel's depiction of violence, blood, and the stalking of women at night has been compared to the real-life terror caused by the Ripper. 18. Stoker's connection to Gothic theater. Bram Stoker's career as the business manager for Henry Irving, one of the greatest actors of his time, exposed him to the world of Gothic theater, which often featured tales of horror, supernatural elements, and dramatic spectacle. Irving was known for playing Mephistopheles, the devilish character from Goethe's Faust, and Stoker admired his performances. Though Irving did not take on the role of Dracula as Stoker had hoped, the melodramatic flair of Gothic stage performances influenced the novel's tone and atmosphere. 19. Scientific advancements of the time. Dracula reflects many of the scientific advancements of the late 19th century, including phrenology, the study of skull shapes, Darwinian evolution, and criminology. In particular, Van Helsing represents the era's ideal of the modern scientist, a man who combines ancient knowledge with cutting-edge scientific techniques. The use of blood transfusions in the novel was also a nod to new medical practices, though the procedure was still experimental at the time. 20. Victorian gender roles and female empowerment. The portrayal of Lucy and Mina reflects the tension between Victorian ideals of femininity and emerging ideas about women's rights. Lucy, who transforms into a vampire, represents the dangers of a sexually liberated woman. She becomes a figure of predatory sexuality and is ultimately destroyed. Mina, on the other hand, is portrayed as intelligent and resourceful but still firmly within the bounds of Victorian womanhood, as her role is primarily supportive to the male characters. Some scholars interpret Mina's role as an early feminist figure, as she plays a key part in deciphering clues and piecing together the information needed to defeat Dracula, but she still adheres to the Victorian ideal of the devoted wife and mother. 21. The role of technology. Stoker incorporated modern technology of the time into the story, such as the typewriter, the telegraph, and even phonographs, early voice recording devices. Characters like Dr. Seward used phonographs to record their observations, adding a layer of realism and grounding the supernatural tale in contemporary society. The clash between the ancient and the modern, symbolized by Dracula, an ancient being, facing modern technology and science, is a recurring theme. 22. Dracula as a Byronic hero. Count Dracula shares some characteristics with the Byronic hero, a literary archetype popularized by Lord Byron. This figure is often characterized by a dark, brooding demeanor, a rebellious nature, and a sense of inner torment. While Dracula is primarily a villain, his mysterious, aristocratic persona and his immortality align him with this romanticized anti-hero figure, which was popular in Gothic literature at the time. 23. Dracula and religious symbolism. The novel is filled with Christian symbolism, with characters relying on crucifixes, communion wafers, and holy water to combat the Count. Dracula is often seen as a representation of anti-Christian forces, with his defiance of death and thirst for blood subverting Christian beliefs about eternal life. The novel can also be read as a struggle between good, symbolized by the devout characters, and evil, embodied by Dracula. 24. Plague and disease metaphor. Vampirism in Dracula can be seen as a metaphor for disease, particularly sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis, which was widespread in Victorian England. The fear of infection and contamination runs throughout the novel, as Dracula spreads his vampiric curse like a plague, turning innocent people into monsters. The use of blood as both the source of life and the medium for vampirism ties into these fears of contamination and degeneration. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Like this video. It helps more people find these classic stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think.